Good evening. We're tracking a critical escalation unfolding right now across the Middle East. Just hours ago, Iran launched direct missile strikes on the United Arab Emirates in retaliation for joint US-Israeli military operations. Dubai, one of the world's most vital commercial and financial hubs, is currently under attack. We're watching this story develop in real time, and what happens in the next 24 to 48 hours could reshape global energy markets, disrupt international commerce, and determine whether this crisis spirals into a broader regional conflict. Here's why you need to pay attention. The Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical oil choke point, is now effectively closed. Iranian naval forces are blocking passage. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply transits through those waters. If that corridor remains shut down, we're looking at potential energy shortages, skyrocketing prices at the pump, and economic disruption affecting every country on Earth. This isn't a distant conflict anymore. This is happening right now, and it's already impacting your wallet. Over the past several hours, we've witnessed the most significant military escalation in this region in decades. The United States and Israel launched what President Trump is calling Operation Epic Fury, a comprehensive strike campaign targeting Iranian military and nuclear facilities. Iran's response was swift and devastating. Ballistic missiles fired at multiple targets across the Middle East, including US military bases in Bahrain that support the Fifth Fleet, and now direct strikes on UAE civilian and infrastructure targets. We have a lot to break down in the next 10 minutes. Stay with us as we walk through exactly what's happening, why it matters, and what comes next. Let's begin with what triggered this explosion of violence. Early Saturday morning, just hours ago, President Donald Trump announced that the United States and Israel had launched major combat operations against Iran. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a threat. This was military action, already underway. According to US military officials and Israeli defense sources, the strikes targeted what they describe as Iran's military infrastructure and nuclear weapons development facilities. The campaign involved coordinated attacks across multiple Iranian locations, with hundreds of military aircraft and missiles deployed. Trump specifically cited what he called an imminent threat to US interests and Israel's security as justification for the operation. But here's what's crucial to understand. These strikes did not come through the typical congressional authorization process. They were launched under executive authority, which has already sparked significant debate in Washington. Some lawmakers are calling it a necessary response to Iranian aggression. Others are raising serious constitutional questions about whether the president had the authority to initiate military operations of this magnitude without formal congressional approval. In his statement, Trump went further than typical military language. He called on Iran's military forces to lay down their weapons and, remarkably, urged Iranian civilians to take over your government. This signals something beyond a conventional military response. It suggests a potential shift toward a regime change objective, which represents a dramatic escalation of US policy toward Iran. The strikes themselves were comprehensive. Israeli officials confirmed they targeted Iran's political and military leadership directly, what they called decapitation strikes. Initial reports indicate explosions were heard across Tehran and other major Iranian cities. The scale and coordination of this operation suggest months of planning and preparation by both US and Israeli military forces. What happened next, however, changed everything. Iran's response was not a measured diplomatic protest. It was military retaliation, delivered within hours of the initial strikes. Iranian state television broadcast footage of ballistic missiles launching from Iranian territory. Multiple volleys were fired in rapid succession, targeting what Iranian military officials said were US military bases and Israeli interests. The primary targets included the US Fifth Fleet Support Facility in Bahrain, one of America's most critical military installations in the region, as well as other US bases scattered across the Middle East. But the strikes didn't stop there. And this is where the situation becomes urgent for civilians beyond the immediate conflict zone. Iranian missiles were fired at the United Arab Emirates, specifically targeting Dubai and surrounding areas. Dubai is home to over 3 million people. It's a global financial centre. It's where international business happens. It's where millions of expatriate workers live and work. at approximately 4:47 p.m. local time, the UAE government issued an emergency alert to its citizens, ordering them to shelter in place in safe areas. Multiple explosions were reported across Dubai's skyline. Emergency services are currently responding to strikes on infrastructure targets. Initial reports suggest impacts on power facilities and port infrastructure, though casualty figures are still being confirmed. The UAE's government released a statement saying they are assessing the situation and appealing for restraint, but the damage is already done. This is a critical development because it expands the conflict beyond Israel and Iran. The UAE, while not a direct combatant in this crisis, has strategic importance as a regional hub. An attack on Dubai signals Iran's willingness to strike beyond traditional military targets and into the broader regional economy. And then there's the Strait of Hormuz situation, which may be the most consequential development of all. Within hours of the strikes, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a stark warning. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. No vessels will be permitted passage. Let me put this in perspective. The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile-wide waterway between Iran and Oman. It is the single most critical energy choke point on Earth. Every single day, approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass through those waters. That represents roughly 20% of all globally traded oil. LNG, liquefied natural gas, also flows through in massive quantities. If the strait remains closed, the consequences are severe and immediate. Oil prices, which were already volatile, could spike dramatically. Some analysts are suggesting potential increases of $40 to $60 per barrel or more. That translates directly to price increases at every gas pump in America and around the world. Shipping insurance premiums have already begun rising. International commerce is effectively being held hostage. Currently, over 750 commercial vessels are reported to be inside the Strait of Hormuz. These aren't military ships. These are merchant vessels, container ships, tankers, cargo vessels, carrying goods and energy supplies that the global economy depends on. They're now trapped in what has become an active conflict zone. US military officials confirm that two carrier strike groups, the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln, are positioned in the region with over 150 aircraft between them. However, even with overwhelming American naval firepower, the geographic reality of the strait makes it extremely difficult to guarantee safe passage if Iran is actively enforcing a blockade with mines, missiles, and fast attack craft. This creates a dangerous situation. Either the US military must forcibly reopen the strait, which means engaging Iranian forces directly and potentially expanding the conflict, or the blockade holds, and the global economy begins to experience severe disruption within days. Which option does the Trump administration choose? That's the question that will define this crisis in the hours ahead. Back in Washington, the strikes have triggered sharp political division. Multiple congressional leaders have raised objections to the fact that these military operations, which represent the largest US combat action in the region in years, were launched without formal congressional approval or even advance notification to key committee members. Some lawmakers, particularly those in the president's party, have praised the strikes as necessary and decisive. Senator Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, stated that the president did what needed to be done to protect American interests. But others are raising constitutional concerns. Democratic and some Republican voices are calling for emergency hearings and questioning the legal authority under which these operations were conducted. This domestic political divide matters because it affects America's ability to project unified national resolve at a critical moment. Adversaries and allies alike are watching to see if the United States can sustain military operations if there's significant domestic political opposition. Beyond Washington, regional reactions are pouring in. Saudi Arabia, a longtime US ally and the world's largest oil producer, has issued a carefully worded statement calling for restraint and de-escalation. The European Union has convened emergency meetings. Russia and China have issued statements condemning what they call US aggression. Turkey, which sits at the crossroads between Europe and the Middle East, is in emergency consultations with its NATO allies. Israel, meanwhile, has maintained that its strikes were defensive and preemptive, aimed at eliminating what it describes as an existential threat. But Israeli officials are also preparing their population for potential further Iranian retaliation and deepening conflict. The question that nobody can answer right now is, where does this end? Has Iran exhausted its immediate retaliation, or is this just the opening exchange in a broader conflict? We are watching history unfold in real time. Within hours, we've gone from military posturing to active combat operations across one of the world's most strategically vital regions. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Dubai is under attack. Hundreds of commercial vessels are trapped. Global energy markets are in free fall. And we still don't know if this crisis will be contained or if we're witnessing the beginning of a much broader conflict. The next 48 to 72 hours will be absolutely critical. Watch for whether Iran launches additional strikes, whether the US military moves to forcibly reopen the Strait of Hormuz, what happens with those 750 trapped vessels, and whether any diplomatic off-ramp emerges before this situation spirals further. We'll continue following this story as it develops. Stay informed, stay safe, and stay with us for the latest updates as this situation evolves.